They didn't just fire me in a closed office or a hidden HR room, they erased me in public on a screen taller than a building. One ordinary Tuesday morning, I walked through Times Square on my way to work, coffee in hand, when I looked up and froze. On the giant digital billboard above the crowds, I saw my own name crossed out under the headline Executive Restructuring. My chest tightened. The crowd kept walking, snapping photos, completely unaware that the person they were looking at was me. In seconds, 10 years of work loyalty and sleepless nights were reduced to a single red slash through my name. No explanation, no warning, just humiliation broadcast across New York City. I stood there, surrounded by strangers, wondering if any of my coworkers had already seen it. Wondering if Marcus, the new CEO who smiled at me yesterday in the elevator, was watching from his office window. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Meeting canceled. Access revoked. In less than a minute, my digital life was gone. The question that echoed in my mind was simple. How can someone erase you so easily? And the harder truth was this. Maybe they thought I was invisible enough that no one would notice. But they were wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? And more importantly, have you ever been made to feel like you didn't matter at work? Drop a comment if this reminds you of something you've gone through. Your story could be the reminder someone else needs that they're not alone. The morning I walked back into Empire Tower, everything felt heavier. My bag, my footsteps, even the air in the lobby. I didn't need anyone to tell me what had happened. My access card blinked red when I tapped it at the gate, and the security guard gave me that practiced look, polite but detached. He didn't ask questions. He just pressed a button, and a junior guard came over to escort me upstairs. The ride in the elevator was suffocating. It wasn't the silence. It was the way everyone else avoided looking at me. One woman shifted her phone closer to her chest, as if standing too close might make her complicit in my downfall. Another man coughed, eyes glued to the glowing floor numbers. It was strange. Yesterday they greeted me with nods, even smiles. Today I was radioactive. When the doors opened, my entire floor felt foreign. Desks I had walked past 1,000 times now seemed like museum pieces in someone else's exhibit. People lowered their voices as I passed. I caught fragments. Did you hear? It was all over Times Square. Nobody spoke to me directly, not even a goodbye. At my desk, a cardboard box was already waiting. Someone had neatly stacked my framed photo, a half-used notebook, and the old coffee mug I kept under the monitor. It looked staged, like my exit had been choreographed in advance. My computer screen glowed with a single line, "Access denied." 10 years of files gone in a blink. Then came Marcus. He appeared at the end of the hall, leaning casually against the doorway of my office. He didn't say much, just offered a thin smile and a single sentence. Nothing personal, just restructuring. Then he walked away, his shoes clicking like a metronome, each step pounding into my chest. I carried the box out with both hands. Security followed me, their silence louder than any words. The lobby doors opened, and I stepped into the chaos of New York traffic. Cars honked, people rushed past. The city moved on as if nothing had happened, as if I had never been there at all. But inside, something shifted. They thought they had ended my story with a cardboard box. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning. That night, my apartment felt smaller than usual. I placed the cardboard box from the office on the kitchen counter, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. My things looked like evidence from a crime scene, tidy, impersonal, stripped of meaning. Instead, I went straight to the closet where my old laptop sat, covered in dust, untouched for years. The screen flickered to life after a long pause, the fan whirring like it was waking from a coma. I typed in the password, hands trembling just a little, not from fear, but from a strange mix of anger and anticipation. My files opened like a time capsule, each folder a reminder of late nights and forgotten victories. Buried deep inside a directory labeled Founder's Legacy, I saw documents I hadn't touched since the early days of the company. Most people never knew these files existed. They weren't glamorous, just contracts, technical notes, drafts of policies. But they carried weight. They were the bones of the systems I helped build. As I scrolled through the archive, one document caught my eye. Operations Agreement V1.2. My heart skipped. I remembered staying up past midnight drafting sections of it with the original founders, back when the company was nothing more than a rented office and an impossible dream. I clicked it open. Pages of dense legal language filled the screen, but I knew the rhythm of those words. I had lived inside them once. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, fighting the fog of exhaustion. Why was I digging through all this? Was it pride? Was it bitterness? Or was I searching for something, anything that reminded me I wasn't as disposable as Marcus made me feel? Then, halfway down the page, a single phrase jumped out at me. My eyes lingered on it, tracing every letter as if the words themselves were whispering something I had forgotten. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't been erased completely. There was still something left, something hidden in plain sight. I stared at the line of text glowing on the screen. At first, it looked like any other clause buried in the dense contract language. But the more I read it, the more my pulse quickened. It was a section almost everyone had forgotten, an old safeguard written in the company's early days, back when the founders believed in fairness before greed and politics swallowed everything. The clause was simple, almost too simple. If an employee was terminated under what the agreement called adverse action, certain protections kicked in automatically. No signatures needed, no negotiations. The process would execute itself, triggered by the very words the company had used against me earlier that morning. I whispered the phrase under my breath, testing the weight of it. Adverse action. That was the exact language Marcus had thrown in my face with that smug smile. He thought it was legal jargon meant to shut me down. But here, on this screen, those words were something else entirely. They were a switch, a quiet fuse waiting to be lit. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the laptop washing over the room. For the first time since Times Square, I felt something other than humiliation. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was recognition. The kind you feel when you realize a puzzle piece you thought was lost had been sitting in your hand all along. I scrolled further, tracing the technical notes attached to the clause. Old protocols, partner systems, automatic executions written in code that hadn't been touched in years. My own fingerprints were all over them. I had helped build this. I knew its bones better than anyone alive. The irony was sharp. They thought they had locked me out, stripped me of every access, every key. But the truth was, they had left the most powerful key inside me all along. And as I read those lines again, a quiet thought settled in my mind. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe it was only just beginning. The clause wasn't just words on paper. It was code hidden deep in the company's operating agreements and tied to systems I had once helped design. I knew it wasn't enough to read it. I needed to see if it still lived, buried under years of updates and careless management. So I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. Greg, an old friend and financial advisor, the kind of man who never lost his cool. When he picked up, I kept my voice steady. "Greg, I need you to look at something. Off the record." He paused, probably sensing the weight in my tone. "Send it over. I'll read it tonight." While waiting, I opened a private server I'd kept all these years, an archive of test environments untouched since I left the engineering team. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, as if I were handling something fragile, dangerous. I typed in the phrase, adverse action. The screen blinked. A line of code responded. A dormant process stirred. The old logic didn't ask for permission. It was built to move on its own. If the condition was met, the sequence would trigger. Transfers, notifications, irreversible steps all in motion before anyone could hit stop. When Greg called back, his voice was low, almost incredulous. This clause, it's airtight. If they used that wording in your termination, the system treats it as live. There's no override. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I hadn't been sure until that moment. Now it was real. I wasn't rushing, though. Anger makes people reckless. I couldn't afford that. Instead, I wrote a simple script, nothing flashy, just enough to listen to wait. It would sit quietly like a trap, armed in the dark, invisible until someone stepped where they shouldn't. By the time the sun began to rise over Brooklyn, the code was loaded, the switch ready. All that was left was for the right word to fall into place. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. The first sign came quietly, an email alert at 2 in the morning. I wasn't even sure if I was awake or dreaming when I saw it flash across my phone. Transaction initiated. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but then I logged in and saw the number staring back at me. 7 figures. A transfer in motion. I sat up straight, the glow of the screen washing over me. The process had worked. The trap I'd armed wasn't theoretical anymore. It was alive, moving exactly the way it had been designed to. Across the river inside Empire Tower, the ripple hit harder. In the finance department, an intern spotted the red flag on a dashboard. Unscheduled distribution, flagged for review. He must have blinked twice, thinking he'd made a mistake, but the numbers didn't lie. Within minutes, it escalated to his manager, then to the head of finance, then inevitably to Marcus. I imagined the panic spreading like wildfire through their offices. Phones buzzing, lights flicking on in the glass tower, people huddling around screens in the middle of the night. A process no one remembered, triggered by words they had used carelessly. For me, the emotions were mixed. Relief, yes, but also something sharper. A satisfaction I didn't dare let myself feel fully. Not yet, because this was only the beginning, the first tremor before the real quake. Greg called me not long after. His voice was steady, but I could hear the current underneath. "It's moving, exactly the way we thought it would. They're scrambling over there, I guarantee it." I didn't answer right away. I was staring out the window at the Brooklyn skyline, the city's still asleep, unaware of the storm that had just started brewing. The first shockwave had landed, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the next one struck, even harder. By dawn, the first tremor had turned into a storm. Word spread quickly inside Empire Tower. What started as a flagged transaction became an all-hands crisis. Finance tried to freeze the transfer, legal argued it couldn't be reversed, and Aditi swore it was just a systems bug. Nobody could agree on the cause, but the money kept moving, line by line through accounts they didn't even realize were still connected. Marcus was furious. I heard later that he stormed into the finance floor just after 7 a.m., slamming his coffee on someone's desk. "Shut it down," he barked. But the more he demanded, the clearer it became that no one knew how. He wasn't in control anymore, and everyone could see it. The whispers started almost immediately. Some said it was an old founder's clause. Others thought it was sabotage. Either way, the shine of authority he had worn so confidently just days before was starting to crack. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. I sat in my apartment watching the city wake up while news alerts pinged one by one on my phone. Not public headlines, not yet, but internal leaks, quiet messages from people who still trusted me enough to pass along what was happening. "It's chaos," one wrote. "Nobody knows who's responsible." Inside, my emotions were complicated. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony, how fast they could turn from smug certainty to frantic denial. But another part stayed calm, almost detached. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about balance, about systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. By mid-morning, the board had called an emergency session. Marcus was told to explain himself. And as he walked into that glass-walled room, briefcase in hand and sweat already forming at his collar, I knew the escalation had only just begun, because the next shockwave would make this one look small. By late afternoon, the weight of the situation had finally settled on Marcus. The confident, sharp-suited executive who once smiled smugly in every meeting was nowhere to be found. Now, people described him pacing the corridors of Empire Tower, tie loosened, phone glued to his ear, eyes darting like a man cornered. I didn't have to imagine his stress. I could hear it. My phone rang just past 8 that night. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity won. I swiped to answer. Listen, his voice cracked, stripped of its usual polish. This isn't what you think. We can work something out. I can make this right. I didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched long enough for him to stumble over his own words. I'll authorize a package, a settlement. You'll walk away with more than you ever expected. Just stop whatever this is. It struck me how quickly the power had shifted. The man who dismissed me with nothing personal was now bargaining like a gambler on his last chip. For the first time, I could hear fear in his voice. Not annoyance, not arrogance, but genuine fear. I finally spoke, keeping my tone calm. Marcus, do you even know what you're dealing with? There was a pause, heavy and unsteady. He exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath all day. I just need this gone. Name your terms. I let his words hang in the air, then ended the call without answering. My heart wasn't racing, my hands weren't shaking. Instead, I felt an unusual stillness. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about inevitability. As I set the phone down, a new notification appeared on my screen, an alert from inside the company's own boardroom. And that was when I knew the real confrontation was coming. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. And by then, the entire tower felt like it was holding its breath. Behind the glass walls of the top-floor conference room, the directors sat in a sharp line, faces hard, voices low. They weren't there to listen to excuses. They wanted answers. Marcus walked in carrying a folder, but the swagger was gone. His shoulders slumped just enough to betray the weight he was under. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. It's a minor system error, he began pacing slowly. An old line of code, nothing to be alarmed about, we're containing it. One of the senior board members cut him off. Then why are we staring at millions already done? Why is compliance flagging this as an automatic execution clause? Marcus froze for a beat too long. He shuffled his papers, tried to redirect. We're still investigating. Investigating? The founder's voice snapped sharp enough to make the room go silent. You signed the operational agreements in 2012. You should know exactly what's in them. The words landed like a hammer. For a second, Marcus looked smaller, cornered in front of the very people he'd been trying to impress since day one. Sweat gathered at his temple, and no amount of corporate jargon could hide it. I wasn't in that room, but through the quiet stream of updates reaching me, I could almost see it. The tension, the shifting glances. The sudden realization among the directors that the man they had trusted wasn't in control at all. And as the pressure mounted, something happened that no one in that boardroom expected. A file slid across the polished table, dropped there by a quiet hand. A copy of the very clause Marcus had been trying to bury. The room fell still. Marcus's face went pale. And that was the moment I knew the showdown was no longer about me versus him. It was him against the truth. The boardroom was already tense, but when the screens on the wall flickered, every eye turned toward them. The finance dashboard refreshed in real time, numbers shifting with cold precision. A line of text appeared across the display. Clause 11B, Final Acceleration Processed. Beneath it, the figure glowed in bold digits. The last transfer had executed. Millions gone in an instant. The room fell into silence. Not the ordinary kind, but the heavy silence of disbelief when people realize the point of no return has already passed. One director leaned forward whispering as if volume could change reality. "Is this final?" The head of compliance answered without hesitation. "Irrevocable. The system recognizes it as a completed execution. There is no rollback." Marcus tried to speak, his voice breaking. "This can't be permanent. There has to be a failsafe." His words echoed hollow, as if even he knew they were lies. His hand trembled as he flipped through the folder he carried, searching desperately for a clause, a loophole, anything. But the folder was empty of solutions. It only contained the evidence of his own signature from years ago. One of the founders looked directly at him. "You buried this. You ignored it. And now we all pay the price." The sting of those words left Marcus frozen in place, jaw clenched, eyes darting anywhere but at the truth staring him down. Meanwhile, in my apartment across the river, I watched the same numbers appear on my screen. The confirmation arrived with a quiet chime, not dramatic, not loud, just a soft signal that the final piece had fallen exactly where it was meant to. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight lift off me. But I knew this wasn't just about money. The transfer had shifted more than funds. It had shifted the balance of power. And as the city outside roared with its usual chaos, a new question surfaced in my mind. What would happen when the world finally learned the truth behind that transfer? The morning after the transfer, the story had already escaped the walls of Empire Tower. Headlines spread across New York. Business outlets, CEO under fire after multi-million-dollar clause ignites. Financial blogs dissected every detail. Reporters camped outside the tower's revolving doors, and investors demanded answers. Marcus, once the golden face of the company, was suddenly invisible. No press appearances, no confident emails to staff, just silence. Inside the tower, employees whispered in the hallways, their voices laced with both fear and relief. Fear because the company's reputation was cracking. Relief because someone had finally stood up to the arrogance they had endured for months. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with messages I never expected. Former colleagues I hadn't heard from in years wrote things like, "You were always the backbone. They should have known better." Recruiters from rival firms sent offers. Even a few strangers reached out saying my story gave them courage. But for me, it wasn't about attention or revenge. It was about clarity. I walked through Brooklyn that day with the city buzzing around me, the same city that had watched me erased on a billboard just weeks earlier. This time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, even if no one recognized me on the street. Still, questions lingered. Marcus was cornered, yes, but he wasn't gone yet. And the board had a decision to make. Would they protect him, or would they finally admit the truth? That night, as I sipped coffee by the window, I caught a breaking news banner scrolling across the TV in a nearby cafe. My heart slowed as I read the words. Something had shifted again, something bigger than I anticipated. And in that moment, I knew the final chapter was about to write itself. It didn't take long after the headlines for the board to act. Within a week, Marcus was gone, stripped of his title, his name erased from the company's website, just as mine had been weeks earlier. The difference was that his exit wasn't quiet. It was public, loud, and humiliating. Investors demanded accountability, and the board had no choice but to sacrifice him to keep the ship afloat. As for me, the transfers were complete, legally, cleanly, and without a single word of protest that could stand in court. The system had spoken. What once felt like a scarlet letter burned across Times Square had become something else entirely, a reminder that even in silence, there can be strength. I didn't rush to take another job, though offers came daily. Instead, I gave myself time to walk the streets without looking over my shoulder. Time to sit with a coffee in hand, watching the city move, knowing I had taken back what was mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving inside someone else's vision. I was choosing my own pace. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not about revenge. It's about details. The details everyone else overlooked, the small lines buried in contracts, the quiet contributions that never made the spotlight, those things matter. And the people who build quietly, who get underestimated, sometimes they carry the sharpest tools without ever needing to raise their voice. So here I am, not erased, not forgotten. Just standing a little taller with a story I never thought I'd have to tell. What about you? Have you ever felt pushed aside, only to realize you had more power than they thought? Share it in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs today.